I should have called 911, but instead, I opened the garage door and stepped into the worst decision of my life. The light flickered above me, buzzing like it knew something I didn't, and that's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in a quiet suburban neighborhood at 2:17 in the morning. Not footsteps, not a voice, just breathing, uneven, controlled, like someone refusing to lose consciousness. My heart kicked hard against my ribs as I reached for the switch, and the overhead light snapped fully on, revealing a streak across the concrete floor that hadn't been there when I left 12 hours ago. Dark, glossy, leading straight to a man leaning against my tool cabinet like he'd always been part of the space, like he owned it. He was tall, broad shoulders, dressed in a black suit that looked like it belonged in a boardroom, not my garage, one hand pressed against his side, the other hanging loose but tense, ready, even like this, even hurt. He didn't look weak, he looked dangerous. I froze, key still in my hand, my car door half open behind me, every instinct screaming at me to back out slowly and pretend I never saw him. But his eyes lifted, sharp, aware, locking onto mine like he'd been waiting for me specifically. And in that moment, something shifted, not fear exactly, something heavier, like I had just stepped into a story I didn't understand yet. "Don't call anyone," he said, voice low, steady, like an order wrapped in a warning. I swallowed, my fingers tightening around my phone anyway. "You're in my garage?" I managed, which felt like the stupidest sentence I'd ever spoken. His lips almost curved, not quite a smile. More like he found something about this situation mildly amusing despite everything. "And you're still standing there," he replied, like that meant something, like I had already made a choice. I should have walked away. I should have left him there and closed the door on whatever world he came from. But instead, I took one step forward, then another, my voice quieter now. "You need help." He didn't answer right away, just watched me, measuring, calculating, like every move I made was being filed away somewhere I couldn't see. Then finally, "You don't know what you're getting into." And maybe that should have stopped me. Maybe that should have been enough. But I was already kneeling beside him, already reaching for the first aid kit I kept on the shelf, already choosing him over my own safety without understanding why. "Stay awake," I said, more to myself than to him, my hands steadier than I felt as I worked, the world outside my garage suddenly very far away, like it didn't matter anymore, like everything that came before this moment had just been a setup for this one. And as his gaze stayed locked on mine, unblinking, unreadable, I realized something that made my breath catch. I wasn't the one in control here. I never had been, not from the second I opened that door, because I hadn't just found a stranger in my garage. I had just found the kind of man who changes everything. And somehow, impossibly, he had found me first. He did not pass out, not once, not even when his breathing grew slower and heavier under my hands. And that scared me more than anything because it meant he was choosing to stay conscious, choosing to watch me, to remember me, every second of it. I kept my focus on the task, on the rhythm of cleaning, wrapping, steadying, anything that would keep my hands from shaking. "You need to lie down," I said finally, glancing up at him, expecting resistance. But instead he shifted slightly, controlled, deliberate, like even this small movement was calculated, like he was deciding whether I was worth trusting with the next step. "Inside," I added, nodding toward the door leading into the house. His eyes followed the direction, then returned to me, searching, measuring again, and for a second I thought he might refuse, might disappear back into whatever night he came from. But then he gave a single nod, slow, final, and that felt like a contract I did not understand. I stood and moved to his side, hesitating only a moment before slipping my arm under his, expecting weight, instability, something, but he remained solid, steady in a way that did not match the situation at all, like he was allowing me to help rather than needing it. We crossed the threshold into my kitchen, the overhead light casting everything in a soft yellow glow that made the scene feel almost normal, except it was not. Nothing about this was normal, I guided him to the chair at my small table, the one I used every morning with coffee and quiet, and now it felt like someone else's life entirely. "Stay here," I said, moving to the sink, grabbing clean towels, warm water, anything that felt like control. Behind me, I could feel his gaze, constant, unbroken. It pressed against my back like a physical thing. "You live alone?" he said, not a question, a statement. I paused for half a second before answering. Yes, and immediately wished I had not. Silence. Stretched. Then, you should not. The words were quiet, but there was something underneath them. Not concern, not exactly, something closer to inevitability, like he was stating a fact about the world, not giving advice. I turned back to him, meeting his eyes for the first time since we stepped inside. I was fine before tonight, I said, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not softer, not warmer, just different, like he was reconsidering something. Before tonight. He repeated, almost to himself. Then his gaze moved past me, scanning the room, the windows, the doors, the small details I had never thought twice about. And suddenly I saw my house the way he did, exposed, predictable, easy. My chest tightened. What are you looking for? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He did not answer immediately, just leaned back slightly, controlled even in rest. Change, he said finally, and I frowned. What does that mean? His eyes returned to mine sharper. Now, more focused than before. It means, he said slowly, like he was choosing each word with care, that the moment you opened that door, your life stopped being what it was. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. You do not get to decide that, I said, stronger than I felt. And for a second, just a second, the corner of his mouth lifted again. Not quite a smile, but something close enough to unsettle me even more. No, he said quietly, but you already did, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my chest, that whatever had walked into my garage tonight was not going to walk back out without taking something with it. And I had a feeling it was going to be me. I did. Not sleep. Not even for a minute. Because every time I closed my eyes I felt it again. That shift he had spoken about. Like the air in my house no longer belonged to me. Like something invisible had redrawn the lines of my life while I stood there pretending I still had control. He remained at the table for a while, silent, still, watching everything without seeming to move at all. And then, sometime past 3 in the morning, he stood, not unsteady, not weak, just precise, like his body. Followed rules I could not see. You should rest, I said, because it felt like the right thing to say. Even though nothing about this situation had a right thing. His eyes flicked toward me, then toward the hallway that led deeper into my house. Where? He asked, and the fact that he did not assume, did not take, unsettled me more than if he had. I hesitated, then nodded toward the small guest room I rarely used. There, I said, leading the way, every step feeling louder than it should have. Like the house itself was aware of what was happening. I pushed the door open and stepped aside, giving him space. He paused at the threshold, just for a second, scanning again, always scanning. Then he stepped inside, and I realized something else in that moment. He was not just looking for danger, he was memorizing everything, the layout, the exits, the details that would let him control this space if he needed to. You are safe here, I said quietly, more to convince myself than him. He turned his head slightly, studying me, and there it was again, that almost smile, that sense that he knew something I did not. No, he said. Not harsh, not loud, just certain. You are not. The words settled between us, heavy, unmovable, and for the first time since I opened the garage door, real fear crept in, not of him exactly, but of what followed him, of what kind of world could produce someone like him, and then let him walk into mine. I swallowed, crossing my arms without realizing it. Then why are you here? I asked, and this time, he did not answer right away. His gaze shifted past me, to the window at the end of the hall, where the faintest hint of early morning blue was beginning to replace the darkness. Because you chose wrong, he said finally, and the way he said it made my chest tighten, not accusatory, not cruel, just factual, like gravity, like something that could not be undone. I shook my head, a small, instinctive denial. I chose to help someone, I said, and his eyes snapped back to mine, sharper now, more intense than before. Exactly, he replied, and then he stepped closer, not invading, not threatening, just close enough that I could see every detail, the clarity in his gaze, the control, the absence of doubt. And now, he continued, voice low, steady. They will come looking for the person who helped me. My breath caught, the words landing harder than anything else he had said so far. not because of how he said it, but because of how certain he sounded, like it was already happening, like it had already been decided. "Who is they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, and for the first time, something in his expression went still, completely still, like a door had closed behind his eyes. "People who do not forgive mistakes," he said. And then, after a pause that felt too long, "And you just became one." The silence that followed was louder than anything that had come before, stretching out, filling every corner of the house. And I realized, with a clarity that made my hands go cold, that whatever I thought this night was going to be, whatever I thought helping him meant, I had been wrong, completely, irreversibly. Wrong, because I had not just let him into my home, I had just invited his world to find me. The house felt different when the sun started to rise, like daylight should have made everything clearer, but instead it only exposed how much had changed. I stood in the hallway long after he disappeared into the guest room, staring at the closed door like it might open on its own, like he might walk out and tell me none of this was real. But it stayed shut, silent, and that silence pressed against me harder than any noise could have. I moved slowly back into the kitchen, every step careful, listening without meaning to, as if I expected to hear something outside, a car, a voice, anything that would prove his warning had already begun. But there was nothing, just the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above the sink. Normal sounds that suddenly felt fragile, like they could break at any moment. I reached for my phone on the counter, my fingers hovering over the screen, the urge to call someone rising sharp and fast, the police, a friend, anyone who could pull me back into the life I understood. But his voice echoed in my head, not loud, not forceful, just certain, "Do not call anyone." And I hated that it worked, hated that I lowered my hand and stepped back like I had already started following rules I never agreed to. I exhaled slowly, pressing my palms against the counter, grounding myself in something solid, something real. This was my house, my space, my life, and yet none of it felt entirely mine anymore. A soft sound behind me made my shoulders tense. I turned quickly, expecting him, but the hallway was empty. The guest room door still closed, and for a second I wondered if I was already imagining things, if fear had started rewriting reality. I shook my head and forced myself to move, to do something normal. I poured a glass of water, took a sip, then another, the coolness steadying me just enough to think, if what he said was true, if someone was coming, then standing here doing nothing was not an option. But what was the alternative? I could not leave, not without answers, not without knowing what I had stepped into. My gaze drifted toward the front window, the early morning light stretching across the street outside, quiet, empty, exactly like every other morning, and yet I could not shake the feeling that something unseen had already shifted, that I was being watched without knowing how or from where. The thought sent a chill through me. I stepped closer to the window, careful, cautious, peering through the glass, scanning the street the way he had scanned my house, looking for something out of place, something that did not belong. But everything looked normal. Parked cars, trimmed lawns, the same neighbor's mailbox leaning slightly to the left, nothing that should have raised alarm. And still, I did not feel safe. A floorboard creaked softly behind me, this time unmistakable. I turned again, slower now, controlled, and saw him standing at the end of the hallway, no longer in the guest room, no longer resting, fully present, fully aware, like he had never needed sleep at all. His gaze moved past me, straight to the window, then back to me, and I saw it then. The shift in him, sharper, more alert than before, like something had just confirmed what he already suspected. "They are early," he said quietly, and my stomach dropped. The words settling into the room like something final, something unavoidable. "Who?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer would not make this easier. His eyes did not leave mine this time, not even for a second. "The people who do not miss twice," he replied, and in that moment, I realized the quiet outside was not normal at all. It was waiting. My pulse started counting something I could not see, every second stretching tighter as his words settled into the room. "They are early," and suddenly the quiet outside was no longer empty. It was filled with possibility, with presence, with eyes I could not prove were there, but could not ignore either. "What do we do?" I asked, the question leaving my mouth before I could stop it, because somehow, impossibly, I was already including myself in whatever this was. He moved without hesitation, crossing the space between us with controlled speed, not rushed, not panicked, just certain, like he had already played this scenario out in his mind 100 times. "We do not react," he said, his voice low, steady, grounding in a way I did not expect. "Not yet." He stepped past me, adjusting the angle of the blinds with a careful hand, just enough to change what could be seen from the outside without making it obvious. The movement was small, almost invisible, but it carried weight. Intention. I watched him, trying to understand how someone could move through a moment like this without fear, without doubt. "How do you know they are here?" I asked, keeping my voice just above a whisper. He did not look at me this time. His attention fixed outward, scanning, calculating. "Because it is too quiet," he replied, and that answer should not have made sense, but it did, more than anything else could have. The street outside had no movement, no early morning joggers, no passing cars, not even the distant sound of someone starting their day. It was like the world had paused, waiting for something to happen. My chest tightened. "They are watching the house," I said, more realization than question, and this time he nodded once, small, confirming, "And waiting to see who walks out," he added, his gaze shifting briefly to me, sharp, deliberate. "Which means you are already part of this." The words landed harder than I expected, not because they were new, but because hearing them said out loud made them real in a way I could not deny. I wrapped my arms around myself without thinking, trying to hold on to something solid. "I did not choose this," I said, and he turned fully toward me now, closing the distance just enough that I had to meet his eyes. "You chose me," he corrected quietly, not harsh, not accusing, just undeniable, and for a second, I wanted to argue, to push back, to reclaim something of myself. But the truth was sitting right there between us, unmovable. I had opened the door. I had pulled him inside. I had stayed. And now there was no version of this where I was not involved. A faint sound broke through the silence then, distant but clear enough to shift everything. The low hum of an engine, slow, controlled, not passing by, but stopping. My breath caught as I turned instinctively toward the window, but his hand lifted slightly, not touching me, just stopping me. "Do not look directly," he said, and I froze. Every instinct screaming to check, to confirm, but something in his tone made me listen, made me trust him in a way that felt dangerous all on its own. "They expect panic," he continued, his voice softer now, almost calm. "They expect movement." Another sound followed, a car door, quiet but final, and my heart kicked harder, faster, counting something I still could not see. "So what do they not expect?" I whispered, barely breathing. His eyes held mine, steady, unshaken. "They do not expect you to stay," he said, and in that moment, I realized this was not just about surviving what was outside. It was about understanding the rules of a world I had never been part of, a world where the smallest choice could decide everything. And as the silence outside shifted, no longer empty, but closing in, I understood something else. If I stepped away now, if I tried to run, I would not just be leaving him behind. I would be stepping directly into whatever was waiting, and somehow, staying inside with him felt like the only chance I had left. The sound of the car door closing did not echo. It settled, like it belonged there, like whoever stepped out had done this before, and that thought alone made my chest tighten, because it meant this was not chaos. It was planned, controlled, intentional. I stayed where I was, exactly like he told me, even though every instinct screamed at me to move, to check, to confirm what my mind was already building into something worse. He did not look at me now. His focus completely shifted outward. Every detail of his posture sharpened, like he had become something else entirely, not the man I had dragged into my house hours ago, but the version of him that existed before I ever opened that garage door. "Listen," he said quietly, and I forced myself to breathe slower, to focus, to separate fear from sound. At first there was nothing, just the same heavy silence, but then, faint, almost unnoticeable, footsteps, not rushed, not hesitant, measured, like whoever they were not worried about being seen, because they did not expect resistance. My stomach dropped. "How many?" I whispered, and this time he did not answer right away, his head tilting slightly, counting something I could not hear clearly. Enough, he said finally, and that single word carried more weight than any number could have. I swallowed, my mind racing through options that did not exist. I could not call anyone. I could not leave. I could not pretend this was not happening, which left me with only one reality. I had to trust him, and that realization alone felt more dangerous than anything outside. Another sound followed, closer now, the soft shift of gravel under weight, a presence moving toward the house without urgency, without hesitation, like they already knew exactly where they were going. I stepped back instinctively, my shoulder brushing against the wall, grounding me just enough to stay still. His hand lifted again, subtle, controlled, not touching, but guiding, reminding me, without words, do not move, do not break the pattern. My breathing slowed, forced, deliberate, matching the calm he carried so effortlessly, even though I knew. It was not calm, it was control, pure and absolute. They are testing, he said after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. They want to see if anything changes. I frowned slightly, confusion cutting through the fear just enough to focus. What happens if it does? I asked. And this time, he looked at me, fully, directly, and there was no softness there, no distance, just truth. Then they know, he replied. And I did not need him to explain what that meant. A shadow shifted across the front window then. So quick I almost thought I imagined it. But my body reacted before my mind could catch up, my breath catching, my fingers tightening against the wall. They were close now, closer than I wanted to admit. Stay exactly where you are, he said, his voice firmer now, not louder, just more certain, and I nodded without thinking, because somewhere between the garage and this moment, he had become the only thing that made sense, the only constant in a situation that had none. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker, like it was holding its breath along with me. And then, 3 slow knocks echoed from the front door, not aggressive, not rushed, just deliberate, like they knew I was inside, like they knew I was listening. And for the first time since this began, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This was not about finding him anymore. It was about finding me. The knock did not come again, not immediately, and somehow that made it worse, because it meant they were not in a hurry. They were waiting, giving me time to react, to make a mistake, to prove exactly what he had warned me about. I stood frozen where I was, every part of me aware of the door, just a few feet away, of the thin barrier between me and whoever stood on the other side, my mind racing through what a normal person would do, what I would have done yesterday, answer it, ask who it was, pretend everything was fine, but yesterday felt like a different life entirely. His presence behind me grounded me in a way that felt both terrifying and necessary. Do not answer, he said quietly, not even looking at the door, as if it did not deserve his attention yet, as if the real decision was not outside, but inside this room, inside me. I swallowed, my voice barely forming. What if they keep knocking? And this time he stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the shift in the air, the control in his presence tightening around the moment. Then we let them, he replied, calm, certain, like patience was a weapon I had never learned to use. The silence stretched again, heavier now, the weight of it pressing against my chest until I had to force myself to breathe. 1 second, 2, 3, and then another knock, slower this time, almost polite, like they were giving me one last chance to confirm what they already suspected. My fingers twitched at my side, the urge to move, to respond, almost overwhelming. They know someone is inside, I whispered, and he nodded slightly. Of course they do, he said, his tone unchanged. But they do not know who is still in control. That word settled differently, control. I had not felt in control since the moment I opened that garage door, and yet here he was, standing in my house, dictating the rhythm of something far bigger than either of us. Or maybe not bigger than him. Maybe this was exactly his world, and I had just stepped into it without understanding the rules. A faint shift came from the other side of the door, not loud, not aggressive, just presence, moving, repositioning, like they were adjusting their view, recalculating. They are trying to read the silence, he said, almost to himself, and I frowned. Confusion mixing with fear. What does that mean? I asked, and for the first time since the knock, his gaze flicked toward the door, then back to me. Sharper now, more focused. It means they expect fear, he said, and fear makes noise. I inhaled slowly, forcing my body to still, to quiet, to match the calm he carried so naturally. Even though I knew it was anything but natural, it was learned, earned, built from a world I had never seen. The seconds stretched longer, the silence holding. And then, finally, the footsteps retreated, not rushed, not defeated, just controlled. Like this was not over. Like this was only the first move in something much larger. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my shoulders dropping slightly as the tension shifted, but he did not relax, not even a fraction, his eyes still fixed, still calculating. That was not a test, he said quietly, and my chest tightened again, the brief relief disappearing as quickly as it came. Then what was it? I asked, and this time, his answer came without pause, without hesitation. An introduction, he said, and the way he said it made one thing painfully clear: they were not leaving. They were just getting started. The silence they left behind did not feel like relief. It felt like a mark, like something invisible had been placed on my house, on me. And even though the footsteps had faded, the presence had not. It lingered in the walls, in the air, in the way my heartbeat refused to slow down. I stayed exactly where I was, afraid that if I moved too quickly, too suddenly, I would undo whatever fragile control he had just held together. He stepped away from the window at last, but not because the danger had passed. I could see it in the way his eyes shifted, not outward anymore, but inward, calculating something deeper, something I could not follow. They will come back, he said quietly, not looking at me, and the certainty in his voice settled heavier than anything else so far. When I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how much it gave away, he finally turned to me then. And for the first time since all of this began, there was something different in his expression, not softer, not weaker, but focused on me in a way that made everything else fade for a second. Soon enough that you cannot pretend this is over, he replied. And that was the moment it fully hit me. There was no going back to before, no version of this where I returned to my normal life. And this became just a story I told myself. I wrapped my arms around myself again, trying to hold on to something steady. Then tell me what to do, I said, because I was out of options, out of control, and somehow he was the only one who understood the rules of whatever this had become. He studied me for a long second, like he was deciding something important, something final, and then he took a step closer, not threatening, not forcing, just present in a way that filled the space between us. You stay with me, he said, simple, direct, like there was no alternative worth considering. I shook my head immediately, instinct kicking in before logic could catch up. This is my house, I said, my voice stronger now, grasping for something that still belonged to me. My life. His gaze did not waver, did not soften. Not anymore, he replied, and the words hit harder than I expected, not because they were cruel, but because they were true in a way I could not argue with. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing through every reason to push back, every argument that should have made sense, but none of them held up against the reality standing in front of me. Why me? I asked finally, the question that had been building since the moment I saw him in the garage. His expression shifted again, just slightly, like this was the one question he had been expecting. Because you did not walk away, he said, and there was something in his voice now, something deeper. Then control, something that felt almost like recognition, like I had crossed a line without knowing it and now there was no way back. I looked at him, really looked this time, past the danger, past the control, to whatever else was there, and for a second, I saw it. Not weakness, not softness, but something human, something that made all of this feel less like a nightmare and more like a choice I had made without understanding the cost. And if I say no? I asked, even though I already knew. The answer, his eyes held mine, steady, unbreakable. Then they will not knock next time, he said quietly, and the room went still again, heavier than before, because now I understood what this really was, not a situation I could escape, not a mistake I could fix, but a turning point, a line I had already crossed the moment I chose to save him. And standing there, in the quiet aftermath of that knock, I realized something that made my breath catch. I was not deciding whether to stay or leave. I was deciding who I was going to become. The choice did not feel like a choice at all. It felt like something that had already been decided long before I understood the question. I stood there in my own living room, staring at a man who had walked into my life like a storm and then stood perfectly still at the center of it, waiting for me to realize that I was already inside, already part of something I could not step out of. My fingers loosened at my sides, the tension shifting into something quieter, heavier, like acceptance I was not ready to admit. "If I stay," I said slowly, each word deliberate, measured, "this does not mean I belong to you." His gaze did not waver, but something in his expression changed again, subtle, almost imperceptible, like he respected the line even as he prepared to cross it. "It means you stay alive," he replied, and the simplicity of that answer settled deeper than anything else, because it stripped everything down to what this really was, not romance, not control, not even power, survival. I let out a breath, long and steady, and nodded once, not fully agreeing, not surrendering, but stepping forward into something I could not avoid, and that was enough for him. I saw it in the way his posture shifted, not relaxing, never that, but aligning, like a decision had been made, and now everything else would follow. He moved then, not toward me, but past me, heading toward the garage door, and my chest tightened again, instinct pulling me after him. "What are you doing?" I asked, following a step behind. He did not slow, did not hesitate. "We are leaving," he said, like it was obvious, like staying here was no longer an option worth considering. I stopped short, the words hitting harder than expected. "This is my house," I said again, but it sounded different now, less certain, less anchored. He paused at the doorway, turning just enough to look back at me, and there was no argument in his eyes, no push, just truth. "It was," he said quietly, and for a second, I hated him for that, for how easily he could say it, for how clearly he could see what I was still trying to hold on to. But deep down, I knew he was right, because whatever safety this place had offered me was already gone, replaced by something unseen that had found its way to my front door without even trying. I glanced back toward the living room, the kitchen, the small details of a life that suddenly felt distant, like I was already remembering them instead of living in them. And then I turned back to him, because despite everything, he was the only thing in this moment that felt certain. "Where are we going?" I asked, and this time, his expression shifted in a way I had not seen before, not softer, not warmer, but darker, deeper, like the answer carried weight I could not yet understand. "Somewhere they cannot reach you," he said, and then, after a pause that felt intentional, "because now they will not stop." The words settled into me, final, unchangeable, and as I stepped forward to follow him into the garage, into whatever came next, I realized something that made my breath catch in a different way than fear. I had not just chosen to stay alive. I had chosen him, and somewhere in the quiet space between those two truths, I knew my life was never going to belong to me alone again.